How do you navigate that kind of clinical inertia?
Clinical inertia is probably the biggest problem that we experience in medications development. Because even if you have a medication that has more warts than flowers, if you know how to use it, if you know how to use it effectively, if you know how to set proper expectations with your patients, you have a good chance of seeing success with it.
Well, Ken, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you. This is Power to the Patients. I'm your host, Brandon Lee, and today I'm joined by Ken Kramer, Vice President and Head of Neuropsychiatry Med Affairs at Bristol Myers Squibb. Ken has spent his entire career focused on psychiatry and neuroscience. And we were just having this conversation before we went live here, and where you were saying that maybe it's not talked enough about this realm of psychiatry. And I'd love to hear you talk about why that might be.
Brandon, thank you very much for inviting me to be here, and it's good to be able to speak with you today. Psychiatry is really the last frontier in science, if you think about it. There's been so much innovation across different therapeutic areas, across different modalities of medicine, but psychiatry and brain health and the brain itself has really lagged behind. And it's because you just can't screw the top of the head off and take a peek in and know what's going on. It's really the fact that when you look at neuroscience, it's two aspects. It's the brain, it's the physical organ, and then it's the mind, which is the less tangible aspect of the brain and what the brain produces. The mind is what makes you, you, and me. It's what makes people tick. And the interest has always been in its complexity. And when you look at what has gone into medications development, when you look into how different places, different therapeutic areas have innovated, the brain and brain health has been slower just because we don't know as much about this organ as maybe we do about oncology and cancers or diabetes.
Yeah. Um, one of the kind of persistent themes on this show is about how once we understand enough about it, it goes from being psychiatry to neurology as a general theme. I'm kind of curious though. I know that over your career, you've chosen to focus on psychiatry, and in fact, I think I've heard you say that it's the only therapeutic area you've ever worked in or want to work in. What got you down this path?
Well, I appreciate you asking me that, Brandon. To go back to what you said before, to me, neurology is the physical structures, the brain, the central nervous system, the spinal cord. Psychiatry is that and what makes the individual, the mind. Uh, Let me give you a little bit of a story about why I think psychiatry is so important to me and why I've dedicated my life to it. Think about if you were walking down the street and you had run into an old classmate from college, let's say. You haven't seen them in a while, you lost touch. And they tell you that they were unfortunately diagnosed with cancer. Your immediate move would be to lean in, provide comfort, to want to get close, to show you sympathy. Now imagine for a second that you run into that same old classmate and they tell you that they've just been diagnosed with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. For many people, that first impulse is to step back, is to move away. And that's because we don't understand and we haven't really created the equality between somatic illness and mental illness. And to be living with a severe mental illness like schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, even major depressive disorder, is terrible enough. To then have stigma layered on top of that is just terrible and just very shameful. And so my desire to work in psychiatry is to not only to help identify what causes illness, to help develop treatments that can perhaps treat that illness, but to also fight the stigma that surrounds those illnesses.
I think what you just said there is so powerful, right? Because so much of this is, I mean, there's the research component of it, but there's also the narrative and the outreach and the kind of engagement component. I know that in your role in Med Affairs, you're probably thinking very deeply about how do you meet the kind of patients, providers, and family members where they are. Can you maybe walk me through a little bit of how you view maybe the platform of Med Affairs as a place to kind of go have those conversations?
Absolutely. What attracted me to medical affairs is the exact same thing that attracted me to being an educator. And that is, you just cannot simply develop a new medication, get it approved by FDA, and place it in front of somebody and expect it to be used.
I
You
love that
have
you said simply, that as if that was the easy part of it, but, please
right.
go on.
But if I were to just take a box of capsules or pills and put it in front of
Sure.
you, you would look at me and say, "Okay, who's the right patient? How do I dose it? How might I have to switch somebody off of something they were on onto something else?" It's a matter of education. You have to first understand why a new medication is needed. What is the current standard of care? What are the current therapeutic options doing well? But more importantly, what are they not doing well? Where are they leaving people with lived experience, whether it's mental illness or a somatic illness like diabetes? Where are they leaving them unfulfilled? And that's the reason why you develop new medications. You want to fill those needs because everybody deserves a fair shot at living their best life. Then you go through the arduous process of clinical trials and ensuring that this medication is effective and safe. Now that's great. That's what gets you onto the dance floor. But what gets you moving is a better understanding of who this medication is best used for. Is there a particular type of patient? Is it what has been missing from their lives? Is it efficacy? Is it safety? Is it tolerability? Our entire mantra is ensuring that people can take medications as directed, but also stay on those medications, especially if it's a chronic illness that may require long-term or lifelong treatment. And part of what medical affairs does is identifies those unmet needs and then teaches people how to effectively and safely use that medication. And not only that, to identify the right patients for that medication.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, of course, Corona and Cobenfy must be top of mind for you. Wonder if you maybe you could use that as a case example to kind of walk me through how you think about bringing some of this to life.
So part of what got me interested in Cobenfy, also known as CAR-XT, back in the day when I joined Karuna, was that when you looked at the treatment of schizophrenia, it has been treated for basically 7 decades with a single class of medications, antipsychotics. And these antipsychotics work by blocking certain receptors in the brain, dopamine receptors mostly, and preventing the excess dopamine from getting onto those receptors, binding to them, and then transducing a signal. And for many people, their lives have been saved by these medications. But there is a trade off to the old school of these dopamine receptor blockers, and that was tolerability issues, safety issues like weight gain, cardiovascular risk, extrapyramidal movement disorder symptoms, akathisia, sedation, many things that people had to trade off one thing for an improvement in their positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia. When when Karuna started thinking about trying to do it differently, they realized that there were other neurotransmitter systems involved and other receptor systems involved, most notably being the acetylcholine system. Now, the acetylcholine system, it's been known for also decades that it had a role in the mechanism of disease of not only schizophrenia, but other types of severe mental illness. But nobody had gone and taken the chance to try to develop a muscarinic medication, a cholinergic medication to treat, even though we knew that the mechanism of action of a new type of drug and the mechanism of disease lined up very nicely. And so was it. I was fascinated by what was a very old, a very new way of thinking about an old problem, and knowing that there used to be a line of investigation. Eli Lilly was one of the first companies to look at muscarinic receptor agonism to treat schizophrenia and to treat other types of psychosis. But because it was so difficult to use these medications and it produced so many tolerability issues, it was put on the shelf. Karuna and the CEO at the time, and one of the brightest people that I've ever known, person named Andrew Miller, took that old drug, xanomeline, off the shelf and said, you know what, there's something here, but we have to improve it. We have to do something to make it more tolerable. And that's when they took the xanomeline and they paired it with trospium, which is an acetylcholine muscarinic receptor antagonist. And by doing those two things, KarXT was born. And then the process started to investigate, to prove that it was both an effective and safe treatment for adults with schizophrenia. And then we get to an approved medication that has now started to be looked at as a novel way to treat a very old problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, could, could we maybe go a little bit deeper here? So, a lot of growing interest in muscarinic science, obviously, given the success at Corinna. Maybe just at a high level, let's start. Like, what is this domain of this MOA, and why is it generating so much excitement now?
Absolutely, Brandon. If you look going back to the 1950s when the first antipsychotic was discovered by accident, it was found to have very potent ability to improve symptoms of psychosis in people with schizophrenia. But with that mechanism comes trade-offs, comes serious tolerability and safety trade-offs that somebody has to understand that if they're going to be treated with this medication, yes, their positive and negative symptoms of schizophrenia might improve, but they're going to have to live with potentially tolerability issues such as weight gain, sedation, motor abnormalities, cardiovascular risk. Uh, and that's because all of these medications work essentially in a single way by binding to and blocking dopamine receptors, specifically the dopamine 2 receptor. But there has to be a better way to treat this illness and to help improve the lives of patients. These are those trade-offs. If you can create something, if you can develop something that takes these trade-offs and make them a little shorter in distance, you're doing great for the overall livelihood of people living with schizophrenia. So when you look at the mechanism of action of, let's say, something like xanomeline, well, we know it's an agonist. It binds to and activates M1 and M4 muscarinic acetylcholine receptors. And it has an effect not only on dopamine, but other neurotransmitters known for a very long time to be involved in the full spectrum of schizophrenia, the positive symptoms, the negative symptoms, and the cognitive symptoms. And so by approaching the treatment of symptoms of schizophrenia in a new way, we've been able to do it with a very different safety profile and perhaps also be able to attack some of the lesser impacted symptoms, such as the negative symptoms, the withdrawal, the anhedonia, the avolition that's associated with schizophrenia, and the cognitive impairment that naturally is part of the disease state. And that's what makes this approach of Cobenfy, of xanomeline and trospium so exciting because it's a fundamentally different way of attacking a very old problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So for the folks who may be listening who are kind of like most curious about the developments here, uh, we've kind of gone through an arduous, let's say, or a long kind of like R&D process, and we finally kind of gotten to the point where we can now bring this um, uh, to patients. What next? Like, what is the kind of like next step on rollout look like to make sure that you can reach as many folks that could benefit from this as possible?
It's a great question, Brandon, because the old saying, "Old habits die hard," applies to medicine as well. W- If you pull any psychiatrist, psychiatric nurse practitioner off the street and say, tell me how you've been treating your patients living with schizophrenia. They'll say, well, I use first generation, second generation, or atypical antipsychotics. And that's all they've ever known. That's all they've ever had to treat this illness. And they have become accustomed and they've become used to those trade offs we were talking about. Yes, there's a very good chance that these medications are going to improve the positive and negative symptoms of their schizophrenia, but there's going to be those trade-offs. As we said before, the tolerability issues, the safety issues. Antipsychotics have a boxed warning uh, on them also, but you get used to using them. You get used to being able to set expectations with your patients about this medication. Listen, I'm going to give you this medication. You can expect it, if it works, to start working in this many weeks. You should expect that there might be some weight gain associated with it. You might feel sleepy. You might feel groggy. All of these things. When you are the first to develop a first in class novel way to treat an old illness, you have to break down those habits and you have to rebuild them with different expectations of work. For instance, with Cobenfy, there is a different safety profile. There's a different tolerability profile. You don't have the weight gain from our clinical trials. You don't have the sedation, but you do have a little bit of nausea and vomiting that the patient will experience and will most notably get used to over time. But that's something different. You have to set those expectations. You might have some people who are saying, listen, schizophrenia, it's a very hard illness to treat. I've spent months, if not years, with a patient trying to stabilize them. My fear of losing what I've gained sometimes is more powerful than my sorrow if I can't gain more. It's taken me years to get them this much better. If I take them off what they're on now and they decompensate, I could lose my patient forever. So you have to provide healthcare practitioners or even patients with this knowledge of how can I effectively and safely switch somebody from something that I've been using my entire career to something that has now been on the market for only 1 year and is a completely different and novel mechanism by which to treat this very old illness. So you have to get people comfortable in being confident that this new medication will do the job as far as efficacy, but that it can also be done safely, and to provide guidance on how best to do it so the patient is never put in peril.
How do you navigate that kind of clinical inertia? That's like a fascinating, uh, I guess, like real world challenge you need to overcome.
Clinical inertia is probably the biggest problem that we experience in medications development, because even if you have a medication that has more warts than flowers, if you know how to use it, if you know how to use it effectively, if you know how to set proper expectations with your patients, you have a good chance of seeing success with it. When something new comes along, it may be proven effective and safe and enough to be approved by the FDA. But the question is, am I willing to take the risk putting it in my patient's body, especially if I've worked so hard to get them to a level of stability that I don't want to lose? So you have to prove yourself in clinical trials, but you also have to prove yourself in real world use. And one of the things that I'm most appreciative at BMS is the ability not only to have engaged in clinical trial science, but in real world evaluation of these medications. Now, with Cobenfy, we've been on the market only since October of 2024. So we're a little bit over a year, getting towards a year and a half. We're really getting excited to see what that real world evidence looks like and what that real world experience looks like. So when we can then take that and better educate healthcare providers and their patients on how best to use this medication safely and effectively.
Yeah, yeah. Ken, one of the I guess trend that we see that might be turning around is that over the last 20 years, a lot of pharma companies got out of psychiatry. And of course, there's a little bit of a renewed interest here. Can you like maybe take me inside like the um, uh, I guess like inside the story, so to speak? What does what do some of those discussions look like internally, like at a BMS where like psychiatry is all of a sudden on the table again?
It's a very complex question and an even more complex answer, Brandon. Back in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of big companies that were into psychiatry. When the SSRIs and the SNRIs were being developed for depression, there was an explosion of interest in psychiatry. But psychiatry is hard. Think about a disease like diabetes. You have hard objective numbers. You can pull some blood, you can get fasting glucose, you can get HbA1c numbers, you can get numbers. If you are developing a medication for hypertension, you slap a blood pressure cuff on somebody, you pump it up a half a dozen times, and you get a number 110 over 80, 160 over 90, 200 over 100. And there's your baseline. 2, 4, 6 weeks later, you do it again and you get another number. You have objective numbers that you can measure. Psychiatry is subjective. Even though we have scales and validated scales to measure efficacy, to measure change in symptom severity, they're very subjective. I'm asking you, so how are your hallucinations? How are your delusions? Are, you, are they a 7 or are they a 5? Or, it's very subjective. And so it's hard. And with that difficulty comes very high placebo responses. Remember, any medication that passes muster has to be better than a control or a placebo. And if you have a highly subjective endpoint or you're using highly subjective scales, your placebo response could be very high. And so it makes it very, very difficult to get that delta between your experimental group and your control group to be looked at as effective. When you have something like diabetes, or you have something like hypertension, or you have something yeah, that utilizes objective measures, you don't have as high a placebo rate. So it becomes easier to design and implement and get clinical trials. Not meaning everything's going to work, but when you're using something subjective, it becomes very hard. And psychiatry research is hard. And that difficulty drove a lot of companies out of psychiatry. Now, fast forward 30 or 40 years, we have learned so much about the brain. We have learned so much about the mind. We have gotten better with our ability to do clinical trials. We are beginning to investigate biomarkers. That's another thing. Psychiatry doesn't have a lot of biomarkers that can be used to identify, okay, this patient has this illness. Years ago, there were no biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. It was diagnosed purely on clinical presentation. Now you have amyloid beta. Now you have phospho-tau. You have ways, even with a simple blood test, to just get closer to a better understanding and a better diagnosis of that illness. We don't have those really in psychiatry yet. Uh, we're we're looking at them, we're investigating them, but we haven't found something yet that can say, okay, I know that you have depression with psychotic features, but you don't have schizophrenia because this blood test tells me that you don't. It is those things that made it so difficult and raised the risk. If you're going to be spending 100, 200, 500 million on a clinical program, you want to have a reasonably uh, good idea that it's going to be successful if you do everything right. When you have subjective science like psychiatry, it makes it all that harder. Now, with what we've learned and we've gotten smarter in understanding the disease states, people are coming back in, but they're also coming back in because we are now diversifying how we attack these illnesses. We are changing the mechanisms of action. It's no longer just a Me Too game where we're going to be making subtle tweaks to what came before us. If you look at a number of companies, small biotech, even larger companies, their mechanisms of action that they're investigating are not what happened 30, 40 years in the past. They're all new.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. You kind of outlined this challenge on both um, the kind of endpoint side, but also upfront in patient identification and selection via these biomarkers. On the endpoint, certainly, with subjective endpoints, it can be um, quite difficult, at least to standardize across many sites and many patients, right? But even upfront and making sure that the folks that you have entering the program are um, as homogenous as possible or as kind of alike as possible. It's been quite a challenge across the country. We do a tremendous amount of work here, so we see it every day. Um, I'm curious, as you look at these new MOAs. Of course, Compass had some exciting phase 3 news. What other MOAs are you most closely watching that you're excited to kind of see play out?
So I am very interested in what's going on with the psychedelics and the neuroplastogens. And what's so interesting is that when you look at social media or you look at the mainstream media, they get so hyper focused on, oh, this is psilocybin, this is magic mushrooms, this is LSD. That's really, while that's accurate, everyone's missing the point. Basically, how these things work are by activating certain receptors in the brain that we have known for decades to be part of the problem, to be somewhat malfunctioning or dysfunctioning that leads to the signs and symptoms of an illness. And that's all they are. Just because they are, they're an ingredient in something that was or is considered to be illicit, doesn't mean we should throw away the science behind it. And so the neuroplastogens and the psychedelics are going to be very important to investigate going forward. There's also a lot of study looking at different receptors that have never really been attacked in psychiatry in the past. NMDA glutamate receptors, AMPA glutamate receptors hold a ton of promise for major depressive disorder and anxiety. Uh, uh, yeah, psilocybin hold tremendous promise as new treatments for very old diseases. But we have to get away from this labeling of them as, oh, they came from an illicit source. There are hundreds of medications that we use across all types of different therapeutic areas that came from natural sources and sometimes illicit sources. You have to just kind of remember that at their very basic, you have a molecule or you have a compound working on a protein, whether it be a brain protein like a receptor or a gut protein like GLP-1, doesn't matter. It's the science that we're using to translate into caring for people.
Yeah, it's funny on the psychedelic side. Uh, there's such a fine line to walk. On one hand, you have folks who are potentially concerned about the stigma, the historic kind of fear around these substances. On another hand, we see a lot of uh, patient excitement, uh, but then potentially too much patient excitement, and you want to make sure that we're not overpromising, especially uh, in the course of running some of these clinical studies. It's quite a fine line that we're trying to walk today.
It's true, Brandon, but think of it from the patient side. Let's say you have somebody who has been living with major depressive disorder for 25 or 30 years. I can pretty much guarantee you that they have been through the entire medicine cabinet of options of SSRIs, SNRIs. Maybe they've had a partial response. Maybe they've had to add an atypical antipsychotic. With every one of those treatments, with every one of those treatment failures, you get closer to what we know as treatment-resistant depression. You get closer to having nothing in those classes be able to help you. That's why it's so important for novel mechanisms of action to be tested, to come about, to be forwarded in development. Because if we just keep treating with the same mechanism, we're going to lose a lot of people to ineffective treatments. And this is why people are just going to have to get over what they think these medications are all about and recognize that there are people who are suffering, there are people who are dying, and that they need better options and more options to treat their serious mental illness.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. Um, I'd love to. I'd love to maybe like um, bring this together by kind of talking about uh, I guess the future for you here. I know that I know, of course, Cobenfy's been in the market for a year and a half now. Which other domains are you excited to be applying muscarinics to, and how are you all thinking about what is next in terms of um, uh, where you'd like to most make progress over at BMS?
So I think the exciting part about what we're doing here at BMS is we look at a mechanism of a medication and then we align that mechanism of action to what our best understanding of the mechanism of disease is. And because we have a good understanding of how uh, Cobenfy works. We know that it is an agonist of M1 and M4 muscarinic receptors. We know that the basic science has shown that it has an ability to modulate a number of neurotransmitters, such as dopamine, such as glutamate, such as GABA. And so, what we're looking at is we're looking at other applications where those neurotransmitters may be in dysfunction that underlie the signs and symptoms of different uh, psychiatric illnesses. And so we're going to apply that. We are running studies in Alzheimer's disease psychosis. We are running studies in bipolar mania and mixed features, and we're also looking at agitation due to Alzheimer's disease. So we are taking what we know about Cobenfy and our understanding of its putative mechanism of action, and we are lining it up in a mirror to our understanding of different mechanisms of disease. Now, that's what we're doing today, but we're constantly investigating where else it could be used and making smart decisions on where we should pursue that next research. But it's what makes me happy is that it's not just a one trick pony in schizophrenia, that we are really putting the muscle of the company and the foresight of our upper management to these other areas. But psychiatry is just one part of medical neuroscience at BMS. We're also looking at Alzheimer's disease, not only neuropsychiatric symptom treatments, but also disease modifying therapies as well in Alzheimer's disease. So it really is a very broad based commitment to neuroscience and brain health here at BMS.
Yeah. Well, certainly inspiring the work that you all are doing on the neuroscience and psychiatry sides of the world. I know that amongst the large players, the kind of activity that you're leading over there is top of mind and quite exciting for all of us who are following along. Um, Ken, I want to thank you for coming on the show and spending the time with me to teach me about how you see things and where you're hoping to make the most progress.
Brandon, it was a pleasure and thank you very much.
Yeah, of course.